Welcome to Little Shoots, Deep Roots, where we become faith gardeners, cultivating deep faith in our families, one little habit at a time. I'm your fellow gardener, Christy Thomas, and today I get to introduce to you Dorina Lazo Gilmore-Young. Darina is a mama to 3 courageous daughters, and she's a remarried widow, and she's a writing teacher, and she's a published children's author. So thanks for joining me, Darina.
Christy, this is so fun. I love the kind of gardening that you are talking about, and I am just honored to be here on the podcast.
So tell us a little bit more about you. I said you have 3 daughters and you're a remarried widow and you're a writer, but there's probably a little bit more to you than that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more?
For sure. Yeah. So I am a girl mama, and my daughters are ages 13, 16, and almost 19. I can't believe it. I'm in the teen stage of life in terms of my mothering. I also have a story of grief and redemption. My first husband died of cancer almost 10 years ago now, and I'm a remarried widow, as you mentioned. So I'm married to Sean. And we have been married for 9 years, and that is God rewriting our story. He officially adopted my daughters, and so he is the new and kind of redeemed daddy to my girls here on earth. And we honor my beloved husband, Eric Lee, who is in heaven. I have published several children's books. I write Bible studies and teach Bible study at my church. And then I'm also a writing teacher at the local high school.
Great. Wow. Yes, you are busy. But so is everybody else. So thank you so much. So we've been talking about little habits of faith that can help our kids grow deeper with Christ. And the habit we're talking about this month is worship. So normally when we think of worship, we just think of like standing in church, singing a song. But I'm curious, how would you define worship?
Yeah, I love this question because it's something I've thought about quite a bit over the years with my daughters. I do primarily think of worship as music, but one of the things I've taught my girls as they've been growing up is that worship is really chasing after God's glory. And what I mean by that is that every day is this opportunity for us to kind of go on a treasure hunt and to look for God at work and to call that out, to celebrate that, to honor that. And so, for sure, in our family, music is one of the ways that we become grounded in God's glory. But I've also experienced worship, and I've watched my kids worship through dance and through cooking and through running and some other things that are part of our daily rhythms, but again, are an opportunity for us to see God and for us to honor God.
That's a really great definition. Seeing God and honoring God in all that we do, not just in, standing and worship in church. I love that. And you mentioned running and cooking, and that is really excellent. So how did you start having these kind of conversations with your kids about worship and chasing God's glory?
Yeah, I mentioned that we have this grief kind of thread that has run through our family, and many families have experienced grief in different ways, but specifically with the loss of my husband, my first husband. And so my daughters were ages 2, 5, and 8 when their daddy went to heaven. They were pretty young. And so immediately we were having these conversations of, what does it look like to see God in the midst of our grief and to chase after God and his glory in our everyday lives? And I will say, from the time I was a little girl, my mom did a lot of singing. We did singing at nighttime. She was in the choir at church. I did some special singing at our church and grew up doing choir and music types of things. And so there was something about that experience of expressing ourselves through music that for us, my brother and I growing up was a form of worship. And then when my girls were young and they were grieving the loss of their dad, I also would spend that time where I would sing over them at nighttime, or we would sing in the car, especially my youngest, who is 2 years old when daddy went to heaven. It was amazing because God used music, I believe, to be part of her healing process. And so even in her car seat right behind me as I was driving, I would hear her. She would be creating these long kind of narrative songs where she was working out her theology of what she believed about God, of daddy being in heaven, of daddy being sick, like all these things. And, at first it's sort of, um, made me a little worried, like, oh, should I correct her? Oh, should I intervene? But I realized that as she was singing her heart out, that God was ministering to her in that way. And we've been able to follow that trajectory all the way now into my kids being in middle school, high school, and college, where music is that way that they've experienced God, they've worshiped God, and also have experienced healing on the journey.
I never really thought about that being such a healing process or being part of the healing process. That's excellent. Were there any times when your kids were like, no, I don't want to worship, or I don't want to do this? Did you have any struggles with this along the way?
I can't think of any specific times, but I did want to also, with my girls, kind of expand that idea that worship is not about performance. Because sometimes I think we sort of get mixed up in that. Like, if you're a really great singer, then you must be like a better worshiper. And that is certainly not the case. My late husband and I actually did a lot of mission work and nonprofit work in the country of Haiti. And so my older girls, especially, spent a lot of time in Haiti when they were young. And one of the things I love about worshiping in Haiti is that in the churches and other open spaces where they are worshiping, they don't necessarily have all the technology that we have in the US or all of the instruments. And so often we would go to these church services or even kind of open air gatherings, and people would be singing, and it would be old hymns and it would be new choruses, but they would sing at the top of their lungs. And it didn't matter what they sounded like. And I think it's a little different, at least here in the US. Sometimes if someone doesn't have a good voice, they don't worship as loudly. But what I learned in Haiti is that truly making a joyful noise to the Lord is what it's about. And so, I talked through that with my kids when they were little too. Like, we're going to just sing out to Jesus, whether we are singing in lament or celebration, we're going to sing out. And my youngest actually has a great voice. My middle daughter is a keyboard player. So now she's on the worship team at her school for chapel. So she plays music and writes music, but she's not a singer. And so we all kind of celebrate that we have different giftings, but we can all worship.
So, on that note of not being able to sing, because I was thinking so often we just equate worship with singing, but you were talking about chasing God's glory and worshiping in other ways as well, in through your cooking or through running. Can you tell me a little bit about how you might introduce something like that to your kids or to other kids, and like that concept that worship isn't just about singing? Because honestly, there are some people that they just don't like singing. It's not that they feel they're a bad singer, they just don't connect with God that way, or they don't feel like that is a worshipful place for them. So how can we help our kids explore other avenues of worship as well?
I love that question. Yeah, I think that it is about teaching our kids to open our eyes and to look for God in their daily rhythms, in their daily expression. So, cooking, for example, when I had little kids, and I want to encourage any mamas who have little kids out there, or perhaps grandparents, daddies who are listening, and I was intentional that I would invite my kids into the kitchen with me. I wouldn't be worried about them making a mess, because them actually being involved in the cooking process meant that they had a little bit of ownership in what they were eating. They got to be creative with me. And also, I would just encourage people, there's a chance for you then to have a conversation about worship in the kitchen. We can look at the beautiful and delicious ingredients that God has created, vegetables and fruit, and the combinations of flavors that come together. And that's a way to worship. And especially if we can call it out for our kids, then they can see that as well. I also come from a family that loves to run. My husband, Sean, and I are both running coaches. And so we have coached our own daughters through the years on their track and field teams, cross country teams. We also have coached the high school team for me, it's almost 20 years now that I've been coaching. And so I always talk to my athletes and my kids about this idea that when we run for God's glory. And so we can worship when we move our body and we recognize and we call out a sense of gratitude. God, thank you that my legs are working today. Thank you that I have breath in my lungs. Thank you for this beautiful scenery, these, cotton clouds and the rainbow sherbet colors of the sunset chasing across the sky. Those are ways that we can worship when we're moving and when we're running. And certain kids are wired that way, that they need to move. Their bodies need to move. They might not be singers, but they might be athletic or just, fidgety, and they need to move, right? And so we, as parents and grandparents and guardians, we can encourage them in that, hey, this is an expression of worship. It is not an expression of rebellion or misbehavior, which sometimes it gets kind of like called that. And even, just if we're using our bodies that it's just about being athletes and winning, actually, that's not true. Using our bodies can be something that we can use to point people back to God and his glory.
I love that. Now, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I know that you have a picture book that is all about this. And I know that there are going to be parents listening who are like, how do I start having this conversation with my kids? So I want you to share about your picture book, because I think it is a perfect fit for this conversation. It's called Chasing God's Glory, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking, Christy. Okay, so this is my book. It's called Chasing God's Glory. Came out a couple of years ago. I love the illustrations by Alyssa DeIsis because she actually kind of helps this to come alive. And just quickly, the premise of the book is that the mom is in the kitchen with her daughter, and this daughter, Zayla, is named after my youngest, just to honor her for what she taught me about glory. And they're singing, Mama's singing, she's singing, rise and shine and give God the glory. And then Zayla's kind of like, well, Mom, what is glory? And so the whole book is about them going on this glory hunt. So they're cooking together, they're riding bikes through the neighborhood, they're seeing the sunrise and the sunset, they're encountering people within the city, they're going to the farmer's market. They're even seeing some girls who are at a church downtown who are dancing and worshiping with their twirling of ribbons. And so there's all these different kind of examples that I was articulating earlier of ways that we can worship, ways that we can see God at work in the world. And the book sort of ushers people through that. There's even a little bit of the grief thread, although it's only just one spread. I do talk in the book about, this girl and her daddy is in heaven. And so she and mama are watching this beautiful sunset, and they feel this mixture of sadness and joy. And even in that, there's God's glory. There's this chance to worship and to lift their eyes to the heavens.
That is so beautiful and exactly fits what we're talking about today. So perfect. So aside from starting by just reading your book, would be a great start, and now I want to grab a copy. What's something that you would say to encourage a parent or a grandparent who wants to help their kids learn how to worship in this way? Is it, it's singing, but it's also more than singing. How would you encourage them if they don't really know where to start?
Yeah, well, I think kind of framing it as this idea of let's go on a glory hunt, or let's kind of go on a hunt of ways that we can worship creatively, and then paying attention to what our kids light up about. So if you have a kid who's really active and loves to run, it might be the running thing. If you have a kid who is very attentive to nature, it might be digging in the garden, which I know is a theme of your podcast, or going out on a summer day and just observing what is happening in the sky, or listening to the music that we hear in the kitchen, the hiss and the sizzle of the ingredients kind of coming together in the pan, some of those things. And when I go to talk in schools, I often have kids think about it in the way of their five senses. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What do you taste? What can you touch? Or if you're not allowed to touch, what textures can you imagine are there? And especially for younger ones, even preschool and up, that's a great way to enter into the conversation, is to just ask them some of those kind of basic questions. And from there, it can lead to a conversation where we say, okay, well, some of these things that we've experienced with our five senses, these are ways we can worship God, or these are ways we can see God at work in our community. And let's also brainstorm, how can we participate or engage in that ourselves?
Wow, this is so great. I was thinking, man, can I get you to come and teach at my church?
Oh, I wish. I need a trip to Canada.
Yeah, that's right. A little far away, but this is so fantastic. Do you have any other thoughts on kids and families in worship that you have been percolating that you didn't get a chance to share yet?
The other thing that I'll add, and depending on people's church background, if they have a certain denomination that they're part of, or maybe if you haven't been involved in a church before, there is the church kind of calendar or liturgical calendar. And so some of the things might be related to certain times of year. And I'm thinking about like Lent or Advent. There are times where we are preparing our hearts for certain things. And those are also an opportunity, I think, to invite kids into worship. So we have lots of traditions around Christmas, for example, but actually engaging your kids in Advent, where it's preparing our hearts for Christ's birth and thinking about what that might look like. And, there's the expression of gifts where a lot of times people will give gifts to each other at Christmas time. Well, what can we do to think about our gifts? Maybe it's our talents, maybe it's our passions, or maybe it's something we can make with our hands that we can bless others. But that too can be a form of worship. And so I just want to encourage families that maybe you already have some fun holiday traditions, but it just takes a little tweak or a conversation where you invite kids to think about, not just we're giving gifts because we always give gifts at Christmas, but we're worshiping through that expression of gifts. And that's just one, little example.
I love that. Now, you have the book about chasing God's glory for kids. Don't you have an adult resource on that kind of similar topic? Or am I
Yes,
imagining
I
that?
do have a Bible study that's called Glory Chasers. And several of my books also kind of have this theme. If any families have experienced grief, I have a devotional journal that's called Breathing Through Grief. And I also have a weekly newsletter called my Glorygram. So I share a lot of these stories about how my family goes chasing for God's glory. And that newsletter is a way that, families can see ideas. And I love to share resources as well. I know you're good at that too, Christy.
Yeah, I actually really love reading your Glorygram. There's not a lot of newsletters that I read regularly, but yours is one of them.
Oh, well, thank you.
Which is what made me think that you would be the perfect person to talk about this topic. If there's something else that you wanted to share with us, please do so now.
Well, since I am a book lover, I will share one other book that is a recommendation as well. This is another one of my children's books, and it's called Kylani's Gift. This one came out last year, and this book actually features a little girl who is learning to do a traditional Filipino dance. She's from a Filipino family, but she's not that good at it in the beginning. Her siblings are all great dancers, but she isn't that good at it. And I think this kind of relates to what we're talking about because sometimes we get caught up into the performance aspect of worship. But what Kylani learns is that little by little, by practicing something and investing in our gifts, then we can improve what we're doing, but also we can offer that gift to someone else. And so she, in the book, I won't give too much of it away, but she's able to do this dance at her grandparents' anniversary party. And it's something that ends up blessing not just her because she's accomplished something, but everyone who gets to be in the audience because they've gotten to see her growth and her development. And I believe the expression of worship is also about that in the process of worshiping God, we grow. We're challenged. Sometimes we are pruned, if we want to use that
Mhm.
metaphor. And also, we get to see flourishing that happens in community. So that's another book recommendation, especially for those families that have, younger kids that they might enjoy reading about Kylani's Gift.
Excellent. Okay. And just tell us, what's your website link? I'll put it in the show notes, but just tell me it here audibly too.
Yeah, so it's really easy to find my stuff, DarinaGilmore.com. And that has all of my children's and adults books. You can sign up for my Glorygram there. I also have a podcast called Global Glory Chasers. And so we talk a lot about food, books, and travel and kind of chasing God's glory as a family.
Fantastic. Excellent. So if this has been something that you want to dig into deeper, then I highly recommend heading over to Dorina's website and signing up for all the things. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Darina.
Oh, Christy, it's an honor. I love all the deep work that you are helping us as parents engage in, and you make it so accessible. So big fan, friend.
Hey, Christy here. I love Dorina's deep and wide understanding of worship. If you want to connect with Dorina further, you can find her and her books at DarinaGilmore.com. Thanks so much for joining me here at Little Shoots Deep Roots. If you want to continue hearing family discipleship focused content, please subscribe, and I'd love if you would leave a rating or a review. Today, may you become 1% more confident in your ability to become a faith gardener, cultivating deep faith in your family, one little habit at a time. Growing with you, Christy.